This means an avoidant feels authentic love for you, not attraction, not attachment built on convenience, not the kind of emotional intensity that burns hot for a few weeks and disappears the second vulnerability enters the room. Real love, the kind that quietly changes the way an avoidant moves through life. And the strange thing about authentic avoidant love is that most people miss it while searching for louder proof. They expect dramatic confessions, constant reassurance, endless affection, obvious emotional transparency. But avoidants rarely experience love in a loud, uncomplicated way. In fact, when an avoidant truly loves you, it often looks nothing like the movies. It looks like someone who used to run from emotional closeness suddenly trying to stay. Someone who once protected every corner of their inner world beginning to leave doors unlocked for you without fully realizing it. Someone who still gets scared, still struggles, still overthinks, but no longer wants a life where you are emotionally absent from it. And if you've ever found yourself staring at an avoidant, wondering whether what they feel is surface-level attachment or something much deeper, subscribe to the channel right now, because this video is going to explain the hidden emotional shifts that happen when an avoidant stops merely liking you and starts loving you in a way that feels frighteningly real to them. The first thing you have to understand is that authentic love often terrifies avoidants before it comforts them. That sounds contradictory, but avoidants are emotional contradictions by nature. Their deepest desire is closeness, connection, emotional safety, and acceptance. But their deepest fear is also closeness, connection, emotional exposure, and dependence. So when authentic love begins forming inside them, it activates two completely opposite emotional systems at the same time. One part of them feels drawn toward you with a depth they cannot fully explain. Another part immediately becomes aware of how vulnerable they now are, because love changes the emotional stakes completely. Before real attachment forms, avoidants can maintain distance emotionally if things become overwhelming. They can detach, distract themselves, convince themselves the connection was not that serious. But authentic love removes some of that emotional escape. Suddenly your presence matters deeply, your absence matters deeply, your opinion matters deeply. And that emotional significance creates fear because now they have something real to lose. That is why avoidants often appear more emotionally complicated once they genuinely fall in love. The connection becomes emotionally important enough to destabilize the protective systems they relied on for years. They may overthink more, need more space temporarily, feel emotionally overwhelmed by how deeply they care. But underneath all of that fear is something incredibly important. They are no longer emotionally untouched by you. One of the clearest signs that an avoidant feels authentic love for you is that they stop treating you like an emotional visitor and start integrating you into the private emotional world they normally guard from almost everyone. This shift is subtle, but once it happens, everything changes. Avoidants are incredibly protective of their inner life. Their routines, thoughts, fears, habits, emotional reactions, vulnerable memories. Most people never fully gain access to these parts of them. They keep emotional compartments because compartments help them feel safe and in control. But authentic love slowly dissolves those compartments. You begin noticing they naturally include you in spaces they once kept separate. They start sharing thoughts they usually process alone. They allow you to witness stress instead of disappearing every single time life becomes emotionally heavy. They stop performing emotional perfection around you. And perhaps most importantly, they begin wanting your presence during ordinary moments, not just emotionally convenient ones. That is a major shift, because when an avoidant starts instinctively letting you exist inside their private emotional ecosystem, it means you are no longer viewed as temporary. You have become emotionally significant enough to reshape the structure of their inner world itself. And once authentic love develops, the avoidance relationship with your presence changes completely. In the beginning of attraction, avoidance may chase chemistry, excitement, mystery, emotional intensity. But authentic love feels different. It becomes less about stimulation and more about emotional regulation. Your presence starts calming their nervous system instead of activating constant emotional defense. They begin craving peaceful closeness with you. Quiet time together starts feeling emotionally fulfilling instead of overwhelming. They may find themselves wanting to tell you random parts of their day, wanting your opinion on things that matter to them, wanting your company even during emotionally neutral moments where nothing dramatic or exciting is happening. This matters because avoidants do not usually associate closeness with peace early on. For many of them, closeness historically became linked with pressure, criticism, overwhelm, or emotional unpredictability. So when your presence starts feeling emotionally safe instead of emotionally consuming, authentic love begins taking root underneath their defenses. They may not fully understand why they suddenly miss your energy during calm moments, why silence feels less comforting when you are absent, why life feels emotionally off when they cannot share ordinary experiences with you anymore. But these are often the exact moments where authentic love quietly reveals itself. Another major shift happens when an avoidant begins showing consistency even during emotionally stressful periods. This is one of the strongest signs that the relationship has moved beyond surface attachment. Because anyone can show up emotionally when life feels easy, exciting, and emotionally manageable. But avoidants who authentically love someone begin trying to maintain connection even when their nervous system wants to retreat completely. And this does not mean they suddenly become flawless communicators overnight. They may still struggle with overwhelm, they may still need space sometimes, but the difference is that now they actively try not to lose the connection while navigating those struggles. They return, they reach back out, they think about how their distance affects you emotionally, they start making effort where they once would have simply disappeared. And for avoidance, that effort carries enormous emotional meaning because authentic love creates responsibility in their mind. Not forced obligation, but emotional responsibility toward the bond itself. They begin caring about protecting the relationship instead of only protecting themselves, and that internal shift changes the way they behave over time. Because once an avoidant truly loves you, losing the connection no longer feels like freedom to them. It starts feeling like grief. And when losing the connection starts feeling like grief instead of relief, the avoidant begins revealing parts of themselves they normally hide from almost everyone else. This is one of the deepest signs of authentic love because avoidants are experts at emotional filtering. Most people only ever meet the carefully managed version of them. The composed version, the self-sufficient version, the emotionally controlled version that keeps vulnerability hidden behind humor, logic, distance, or calmness. But authentic love slowly weakens that performance. They start letting you see exhaustion instead of pretending they are always fine. They admit fears they normally bury. They become emotionally awkward around topics that actually matter to them because now there is real emotional risk involved. And what makes this so meaningful is that avoidants do not expose emotional softness casually. Vulnerability feels dangerous to them because it removes control. So when they start allowing you into the messy, uncertain, imperfect parts of themselves, it means something inside them has decided that emotional closeness with you feels safer than emotional isolation without you. You begin seeing reactions they suppress around others. Little moments of jealousy they try to hide, small insecurities that quietly surface, emotional tenderness that appears unexpectedly when your well-being is involved. And these moments matter because they reveal that the avoidant is no longer just interacting with you from a guarded position, they are emotionally participating with you from somewhere real. One of the clearest ways authentic love reveals itself in avoidance is through the way they begin missing you. Not just during loneliness, not just when they are emotionally struggling, but during peaceful moments too. This distinction is incredibly important because many people mistake emotional dependency for love. Authentic avoidant love feels different. It is not just about needing comfort during pain, it is about instinctively wanting your presence woven into ordinary life. They think about you during random calm moments. A quiet drive suddenly feels incomplete without telling you something they noticed. A beautiful moment during the day automatically makes them want to share it with you. They begin emotionally reaching for you internally even when nothing is wrong. And this is deeply significant because avoidants are often used to relying on themselves emotionally. Solitude becomes familiar to them. Independence becomes their emotional baseline. So when another person starts naturally appearing inside moments that used to belong only to themselves, it means attachment has become deeply integrated into their nervous system. They are no longer simply emotionally stimulated by you, they are emotionally connected to you in a way that changes how they experience daily life itself. Your absence starts feeling emotionally noticeable even in silence. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just deeply present in its absence. And once authentic love reaches that level, the avoidance relationship with vulnerability slowly begins changing too. This process is usually gradual, almost invisible at first, but it matters more than grand declarations ever could. Avoidants are conditioned to escape emotional discomfort quickly. If feelings become overwhelming, withdrawal feels safer than exposure. If conflict appears, distance feels easier than vulnerability. But authentic love creates tension inside that pattern because now the avoidant does not just want relief from emotions, they want to preserve the relationship too. So instead of automatically running every time emotions deepen, they begin trying to stay emotionally present longer. They start communicating difficult feelings they normally would have buried. They attempt conversations they once avoided entirely. And yes, they may still stumble through vulnerability awkwardly. They may struggle finding the right words. They may still need pauses, space, or emotional regulation time, but the difference is that now they are trying to move toward emotional honesty instead of automatically escaping from it. And for avoidants, this is one of the purest forms of authentic love because vulnerability costs them something psychologically. It requires them to sit inside emotional uncertainty instead of immediately protecting themselves from it. So when an avoidant begins willingly exposing emotional truths they once hid instinctively, it often means the relationship has become emotionally irreplaceable to them. Another powerful sign that authentic love is developing is the moment they begin prioritizing your emotional well-being alongside their own need for independence. This shift changes the entire emotional dynamic. Early on, avoidants are often hyper-focused on protecting themselves from emotional overwhelm. Space, control, and self-preservation dominate their decisions. But when love becomes real, your feelings begin carrying emotional weight inside them too. They start noticing how their withdrawal impacts you. They become more aware of the emotional consequences of inconsistency. They begin caring whether you feel secure, valued, and emotionally safe with them. And while they may still struggle balancing closeness and space, the intention changes dramatically. The relationship stops being centered entirely around their comfort zone. They begin making adjustments because your emotional experience matters to them now. They become gentler with your heart, more thoughtful about communication, more protective of the bond itself. And this is incredibly meaningful because avoidants usually do not naturally prioritize emotional dependency in relationships, but authentic love softens that instinct. It creates emotional accountability, not because they are forced into it, but because hurting you begins hurting them too. That emotional crossover is one of the clearest signs that their feelings have moved beyond attraction into something much deeper. And perhaps one of the most revealing signs of authentic avoidant love is how deeply the idea of losing you begins affecting them internally, even when they try to appear emotionally composed on the outside. Avoidants often pride themselves on emotional control. They do not always express panic openly. They may still appear calm, logical, or detached externally during moments that deeply affect them internally. But once authentic love forms, the thought of losing the connection starts creating fear they cannot easily silence anymore. Your emotional distance suddenly matters. Changes in your energy become noticeable immediately. A colder tone from you can stay in their mind for hours. The possibility of you emotionally pulling away becomes genuinely frightening because now the relationship is tied to emotional safety, comfort, and attachment inside them. And what makes this so powerful is that avoidants usually spend years convincing themselves they do not need anyone deeply enough to be emotionally devastated by loss. So when they begin realizing that your absence would genuinely wound them emotionally, it forces them into an uncomfortable truth. They are no longer emotionally independent from the connection. They love you. Not in a casual, surface-level way, but in the terrifyingly real way that makes another human being capable of deeply affecting their inner world. And once an avoidant reaches that point emotionally, the difference between fascination and authentic love becomes impossible to ignore, because avoidants can absolutely become fascinated by someone without truly building lasting emotional attachment. Fascination is intense, exciting, emotionally stimulating. It thrives on chemistry, mystery, emotional highs, and the thrill of connection without full vulnerability. But authentic love changes the emotional structure completely. Fascination wants the feeling. Authentic love wants the person. That is the difference. When an avoidant is merely fascinated, the relationship often revolves around emotional intensity and temporary closeness. But when they genuinely love you, they begin building emotional continuity with you. They stop experiencing you as just a source of emotional excitement and start experiencing you as emotional grounding. Your role in their life becomes steadier, deeper, more integrated into who they are becoming emotionally. They begin thinking beyond moments and start thinking in terms of permanence, even if that thought quietly scares them. The connection becomes less about chasing stimulation and more about protecting emotional presence. They want your existence in their life itself, not just the emotional rush that comes from interaction. And this shift is often what surprises avoidants the most. They realize they are no longer attached only to how you make them feel temporarily. They are attached to you specifically, your energy, your voice, your mind, your emotional familiarity, the strange sense of calmness your presence creates inside them. That is why avoidants who authentically love someone eventually begin associating that person with emotional home. Not home in the loud romantic sense people usually imagine, but in the nervous system sense, in the emotional exhale sense, in the I feel more like myself when you are here sense. This is incredibly significant because many avoidants spend years emotionally self-regulating alone. Solitude becomes their safest emotional environment because they trust themselves more than emotional dependence on others. But authentic love slowly changes that equation. Your presence starts regulating them emotionally in ways they did not expect. Stress feels easier to carry when you are near. Their mind quiets faster after talking to you. The emotional chaos of life feels softer in your presence. And perhaps the deepest part of all this is that avoidants often do not consciously realize how attached they have become until they experience distance from the person who became their emotional safety. Suddenly the absence feels loud. The peace they associated with you becomes noticeable only when it disappears, and that realization can shake avoidants deeply because it forces them to confront something they spent years avoiding. They have emotionally bonded with someone in a way that goes beyond attraction or companionship. Their nervous system has learned your presence. Your energy has become emotionally familiar to them. And authentic love often begins exactly there, in familiarity that feels safe enough to stay inside. But alongside that comfort comes one of the deepest contradictions avoidants experience. The more they love you, the more emotionally dependent they fear becoming. This internal conflict creates enormous tension inside them because authentic love removes the illusion of emotional self-sufficiency they relied on for so long. Suddenly, another person has the ability to calm them emotionally, but also hurt them emotionally. Another person can influence their peace, their mood, their emotional stability, and for avoidance, that level of emotional dependence can feel terrifying even while it feels beautiful. This is why deeply loving avoidants often appear emotionally conflicted. One part of them wants closeness more than ever before. Another part becomes hyper-aware of the risks attached to that closeness. They may overthink the relationship intensely. They may become temporarily quieter after moments of emotional intimacy. They may suddenly need space after feeling especially connected to you. And if you do not understand avoidant attachment, these shifts can feel confusing or contradictory. But often, the avoidant is not withdrawing because love disappeared. They are withdrawing because love became emotionally real enough to scare them, because now there is vulnerability, now there is emotional exposure, now there is something precious enough to lose. That is why authentic love often causes avoidants to temporarily retreat inward at certain stages of the relationship, not because they stopped caring, but because the emotional stakes suddenly feel enormous to them. The more attached they become, the harder it becomes to maintain emotional control internally. They start imagining loss, rejection, abandonment, emotional dependence. Their mind begins trying to protect them from pain that has not even happened yet. And this internal overthinking can create moments where the avoidant appears distant, quieter, or emotionally overwhelmed right when the relationship starts becoming most meaningful. But what matters is what happens underneath the fear. Do they still emotionally return? Do they still try to preserve the connection? Do they still show signs that the relationship matters deeply to them despite the internal conflict? Because authentic love and avoidance rarely removes fear entirely. Instead, it creates a painful emotional paradox where they are simultaneously afraid of closeness and afraid of losing the closeness they found with you. That contradiction can make loving an avoidant emotionally complex, but it also reveals how real the attachment has become beneath their defenses. And eventually, when authentic love settles deeply enough inside them, you begin noticing subtle shifts in how they approach the future of the relationship itself. This is one of the clearest signs that the connection has become emotionally serious to them. Avoidants who are not deeply invested tend to stay emotionally present-focused. They avoid thinking too far ahead because long-term emotional attachment feels threatening. But when authentic love develops, they begin protecting the future of the connection almost instinctively. They start considering your role in their long-term life emotionally, even if they do not say it directly at first. They become more careful during conflict because losing the relationship now feels emotionally devastating instead of merely inconvenient. They begin making choices that preserve emotional continuity between you. They think about how actions today might affect the connection months from now. And perhaps most importantly, they begin imagining a future where your presence remains emotionally permanent, quietly, carefully, sometimes even unconsciously. Because once an avoidant authentically loves someone, the idea of life without that connection no longer feels emotionally neutral. It starts feeling like losing part of the emotional stability they slowly built around you. And the deeper that emotional permanence settles inside them, the more avoidants begin seeking reassurance in quiet, indirect ways they barely understand themselves. This is one of the most overlooked signs of authentic love because avoidants rarely ask for reassurance openly. They are not usually the type to constantly say, "Do you still love me?" or "Are we okay?" In fact, many avoidants feel deeply uncomfortable admitting how much reassurance they need once someone becomes emotionally important to them, but their behavior starts revealing it anyway. They notice changes in your energy immediately. A delayed response from you suddenly lingers in their mind longer than they want to admit. A shift in your tone can quietly affect their entire mood. They may ask casual questions that secretly carry emotional weight underneath them. They may look for tiny signs that your feelings remain stable, that the connection is still emotionally secure, that you are not slowly drifting away from them, and this matters because avoidants hate feeling emotionally dependent. Many of them spent years convincing themselves they could stay emotionally self-contained forever. So when another person's warmth, consistency, and emotional presence start becoming emotionally regulating to them, it creates vulnerability they cannot completely hide anymore. That quiet need for reassurance often signals something profound. They are no longer emotionally surviving beside you, they are emotionally attached to you. And once that attachment becomes real enough, another major transformation begins happening inside the avoidant that changes the relationship completely. They start confronting their own emotional patterns instead of constantly blaming circumstances, timing, stress, or the need for endless distance. This is one of the clearest indicators that authentic love has reached a serious depth inside them, because avoidants are masters at rationalizing emotional avoidance when they are not deeply invested. They can convince themselves that relationships are too much, that emotional closeness is the problem, that needing space solves everything. But authentic love eventually forces self-awareness into the open. The avoidant begins recognizing patterns they once ignored. They notice how fear influences their behavior. They realize how quickly they retreat when vulnerability appears. They start understanding that some of the emotional pain in their relationships did not come only from other people. It also came from the walls they built to protect themselves. And this realization is incredibly uncomfortable for avoidants because it challenges the emotional survival systems they relied on for years. But love motivates growth in ways attraction never can. Once they genuinely fear losing someone emotionally irreplaceable, avoidance itself stops feeling emotionally safe. It starts feeling dangerous, because now their old coping mechanisms threaten the very connection they love most. And that realization can become the beginning of profound emotional change. This is why authentic avoidant love is often far deeper than outsiders realize. Avoidants usually do not love lightly. In fact, many avoidants go long periods emotionally disconnected from people precisely because true attachment affects them so intensely. They may enjoy companionship, attraction, chemistry, even emotional closeness temporarily. But authentic love is rare for them because it destabilizes their emotional defenses completely. Once they genuinely love someone, that person often remains emotionally significant inside them for an incredibly long time. They carry emotional memories quietly. They revisit moments internally long after they outwardly appear calm. They hold on to emotional connections more deeply than their detached exterior suggests. And perhaps the most misunderstood thing about avoidance is this: many of them feel emotions with enormous intensity internally while expressing them very minimally externally. That is why authentic love from an avoidant can seem quiet from the outside while feeling overwhelming inside them. Their attachment is often hidden beneath restraint, fear, and emotional caution, but when it is real, it tends to root itself deeply into their inner world. They do not easily forget people who reached their guarded emotional core. And sadly, one of the most painful truths about avoidance is that many of them fully recognize the depth of their love only after realizing how emotionally irreplaceable someone has become. Because avoidants often process emotions in delayed waves. During the relationship itself, fear and vulnerability can dominate their awareness. They focus on needing space, regulating emotions, protecting independence, avoiding overwhelm. But distance changes perspective, silence changes perspective, the possibility of permanent loss changes perspective, and suddenly the avoidant begins seeing the connection differently. The calmness you brought into their life, the emotional safety they slowly learned in your presence, the way your consistency softened parts of them they thought would remain guarded forever. They begin understanding that what they felt was not casual attachment or temporary emotional dependence. It was love, real love, the kind that quietly integrated itself into their routines, their thoughts, their nervous system, their future. And for avoidants, this realization can feel emotionally devastating because by the time clarity fully arrives, the relationship may already be damaged by fear, withdrawal, or emotional inconsistency. That is the tragedy hidden inside many avoidant love stories. They often understand the depth of their feelings most clearly once they are confronted with the possibility of truly losing the person they love. So in the end, authentic avoidant love may never look exactly the way people expect love to look. It may not always arrive wrapped in constant words, dramatic displays, or effortless emotional openness. Sometimes it looks quieter than that, more restrained, more complicated. But beneath that quietness is often something incredibly real. Devotion hidden beneath fear, vulnerability hidden beneath emotional control, deep attachment hidden beneath hesitation. Because when an avoidant authentically loves you, they are not simply enjoying your presence temporarily. They are slowly allowing you into places inside themselves they once believed nobody could safely reach. They are learning how to stay emotionally connected while fighting instincts that once told them closeness was dangerous. They are trying to balance love with fear, attachment with self-protection, vulnerability with survival. And that inner battle is exactly what makes authentic avoidant love feel so emotionally profound once you finally understand it. Because beneath all the silence, hesitation, and emotional complexity, there is often a heart loving far more deeply than it knows how to explain out loud.